It's the season for music like that. It means it's the home stretch of the midterm campaign in 2018. And good afternoon, everybody. It also means the fact that I'm on talking to you right now. It means it's another Tuesday, another edition of 218. 218, of course, the race for the House. Democrats trying to pick up 23 seats and gain control. Republicans trying to hang on for dear life. I'm Steve Kornacki here in front of the big board. And we say we're setting the scene here for the House, the race for Congress, and all of that. We also want to say there's one indicator. We talk about the state of play here in the midterms. There's always one indicator, one polling number we're keeping an eye on today, tomorrow, and all the way through to Election Day, and that is the president's approval rating. And we have news on that front. You probably know the news. If you've been seeing it the last few days, there's a poll out this morning that has his approval rating at 36% in one of them. It's 38% in another one. These are low numbers. We want to take you through what's going on there, what it might mean. So I say there's a couple different numbers out there. Now we track here the average of all of the polls that are out there, all the approval rating polls for Donald Trump. That still sits, according to Real Clear Politics here, that still sits at 41.1%. A lot of times what happens is if there's a change, if there's a new trend and the numbers start dropping somewhere, it takes a while, if that really is a trend, it takes a while for the average to catch up to that. The key here for Donald Trump is this number here, you see the average, 41.1%. A couple weeks ago, it was close to 44%. He was solidly in the mid-40s in his approval rating, the average of his approval rating, solidly in the mid-40s. And when you talk to Republicans and say, where do you need the president to be if you want to have a chance of hanging on to the House, they'll tell you, we need him in the mid-40s. So that was a couple weeks ago. Even in the average now, he's basically dropped about 3 points in the last couple weeks. And now, again, we see all these new polls that have him even lower than this number. So it raises the possibility, hey, when we check back in next week, is this 41.1 going to be even lower? Is it going to be down by 40? Is it even going to be under 40 potentially? And obviously, the lower it goes, the more dangerous, the more treacherous that territory becomes for Republicans. So we got a panel here we're going to talk to in a little bit. And one of the things I'm going to be asking them, all sorts of theories out there. What is it that's causing the president's approval rating to drop the last couple of weeks? There was John McCain. There was Paul Manafort news. All sorts of different things that are in the air. Is it just folks coming back from being away for the summer and tuning back into the news? Is that something that's going on here? We'll talk about that with the panel, but one of the other implications we say with a fluctuating, with potentially a lowering approval rating for the president is if that continues, it opens up more possibilities for the opposition party, for Democrats. We say the House, Democrats trying to get 23 seats there. The other thing that's sort of coming into focus right now, Democrats having more of a path than we thought at the beginning of this cycle when it comes to the Senate. Remember, on the Senate side, they need a net gain of 2 seats, but we looked at it and we said, boy, the map does not look good for them this year. Well, a couple new polls, 3 new polls from NBC in the last week have really changed the way people look at the race for the Senate. In Missouri, Claire McCaskill, Democratic incumbent, obviously big Trump state. He won this by 19 points. Our poll shows a dead even race there. Now, obviously, McCaskill, that would be a Republican pickup if she loses. She very much could with poll numbers like that, but also she's very much in this game in Missouri. The news, though, was more surprising in Indiana. This is a state that Donald Trump won by about 20 points. Joe Donnelly, a lot of folks thought this Democratic senator won in a bit of a fluke in 2012, and yet he's now leading by 6 points in Indiana in our poll. That one raised a lot of eyebrows. And then this, Tennessee, state that Donald Trump carried by 26 points, state that hasn't voted for a Democrat for the U.S. Senate since 1990. Phil Bredesen, former Democratic governor, we have him leading by 2 points over Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn. Again, this would be a Democratic pickup. Bob Corker, Republican incumbent, he is not running for re-election. So what does that do to the map? We say at the start of the cycle, the map looked so hostile to Democrats. There were so many states that Donald Trump won where Democrats would run for re-election. A lot of those states, like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Casey in Pennsylvania, a lot of them look a lot safer for Democrats now. So the emerging battleground is Democrats, in a close race in Florida, we know that. Manchin in West Virginia, Missouri, we showed you McCaskill, Donnelly, North Dakota, Montana. 6 states there where Democrats have got to try to hang on, but 4 opportunities. Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Tennessee, 4 opportunities for pickups. Again, a net gain of 2. We'll break this out. You'll be seeing this a lot more later in the fall, but give you a quick look here at the battle for the control of the Senate here. And again, we say it's an uphill battle. If we say this is the battleground, those states I just showed you, you can see the Democrats here at 43. They got to get to 51, remember. They need to be more than 50 because the tie at 50, Mike Pence breaks it for the Republicans. So Democrats would need 8 of these. They need the lion's share of them. That's why we said the map was so tough. But look at this. If they got Tennessee, that poll we just showed you, if that went into the Democratic category, Claire McCaskill, she's tied. If she holds on and wins that race, Indiana, if Donnelly, our poll has him up 6, if he hangs on, those 3 that we just showed you right there, that puts Democrats at 46. What else could they do? Kirsten Sinema, their nominee in Arizona, most recent poll we took out there, had her ahead. Let's see. Manchin, the polling in West Virginia, even though Trump won this state by 42 points, the polling has had Manchin doing very well right there. You can see they're sitting at 48. Now, in terms of the Republican side, take a look at this. Montana. That's the other one I meant to say. Tester. The polling has been pretty encouraging for Tester. That puts Democrats all the way to 49. That puts it within range, but still, that would mean Heidi Heitkamp's got to hang on in North Dakota. That could be a tall order. That would mean Bill Nelson's got to hang on in Florida, where the governor there, Rick Scott's giving him a tougher run than we expected. Ted Cruz there in Texas. Could Democrats actually knock him off? Some skepticism. Maybe the Democrats say they take Nevada, say they knock out Heller, they're at 50, but then say Rick Scott wins, Cruz hangs on, and Heitkamp just can't overcome the gravity of North Dakota. If that happened, even though Republicans only win 3 of the battleground, they'd still would have control of the Senate. So we say the map is tough for Democrats, but the new thing here, I think, when you start to look at those polls is you can start to see a real path for Democrats in the Senate. So we talk so much about the House, but the Senate, I think, especially if we keep seeing the president's poll numbers drop, we will be talking a lot more about the Senate. I have, as you can see, completed the journey back to the table. Joining now our round table, we have Democratic strategist Joel Payne, Evan Siegfried, Republican strategist, and Washington bureau chief for the USA Today, Susan Page. Thank you all for being with us. So as I try to catch my breath here, I'm going to turn it over to you, Susan. But that question I asked over there, I'm interested what everybody here thinks about that. The president's poll numbers have absolutely dropped in the last 2 weeks. I think you could trace the decline started sometime in late August. A lot of different theories. What do you think is going on there?
Here's something extraordinary, is that look at the economy. The unemployment rate's below 4%. The growth rate is above 4%, and the president is dropping in polls. That is, I think, if not unprecedented, close to unprecedented. So what's doing that, causing that, I think, is a consistent volley of stories that raise questions about his leadership, his stability, questions about the chaos in the White House. That's been a consistent message from the Bob Woodward book, from the New York Times op-ed. And I think that is accumulating to have a real effect on voters' willingness to stick with Donald Trump.
So Susan is going with it's an accumulation of things. It's Paul Manafort. It's what do you think, Evan?
I think it is partially there's a disconnect on the economy. When you look at polling, it says that with the tax reform plan that we passed in December, only 16 to 19% of each demographic that isn't a Republican says they're paying less in taxes now. And it's the same with the good economy. Are you better off than you were in 2016? And most people say they're either the same or it's worse, and they're struggling to pay their bills. And then when you have things like health care, costs going up, and how there's access to doctors shrinking, you have Democrats winning on that message. But it's also just this anger that has been unleashed in the country at government getting nothing done. 2016 was a shot across the bow for both parties, saying you need to get results. And what are the big results? Senate Republicans can't hang their hat on Neil Gorsuch and ultimately Brett Kavanaugh. We need to have more than that, and we're not seeing it. And we're also seeing a surge in women voters who are saying we're done, especially white, college-educated, suburban married women who have been abandoning the GOP. But the one demographic we have been ignoring and is showing signs that they'll actually turn out, young voters and millennials. And they've never gone for the Republican Party. 1 in 5 millennials identify with the Republican Party. Republican leaders said, oh, as they get older and get jobs and pay taxes, they will actually become conservative. But we are older. We are, the oldest millennials are 37 years old, have jobs, are paying taxes, are saving for college for their kids, and they still say the Republican Party doesn't represent me.
Let me stay in this question of trying to diagnose this. What do you think it is, Joel, in the last couple of weeks?
Evan, you talked about they're not getting anything done. They are getting things done, actually. 2 Supreme Court nominees, a tax bill, a rollback of all the Obama-era regulations. I think Republicans are getting plenty done. I think voters are saying, we don't like what you're getting done. We don't feel the effect of it at home. That tax law is incredibly unpopular. It's been sinking ever since it passed, and it keeps dropping, and there's no bottom to it. That health care law that Republicans are trying to repeal, that's incredibly unpopular. Democrats in places like West Virginia, Joe Manchin, hammering Republicans on that. The voting public is saying we don't like the change that Republicans are trying to bring. So I think that's actually what you're seeing being reflected here.
You mentioned West Virginia, and there was a new ad this week, Joe Manchin running for re-election there, the Democrat. He had a famous ad in 2010 when he ran for the Senate where he shot the cap and trade bill the Obama administration was pushing. Now he's shooting a lawsuit that his opponent, the Republican Attorney General, has filed against the ACA. So interesting to see those politics change. He certainly wasn't running on the ACA in 2010. But Susan, and you mentioned this at the top, this issue of the economy, the unemployment rate dropping under 4%, all of it, where the stock market is, where it's been since Donald Trump became president, this continuous growth there. Is this a case where there is more to the economic story, where there is more unease, more anxiety there beneath the surface than those statistics capture? Or is this a case where our politics have just changed in a way where that old formula about, good economy equals good approval rating just doesn't apply anymore?
Well, there is some disparity in how good the economy is depending on where you sit, right? Wealthy people have done better than blue-collar workers in this economy. But the fact is the economy is pretty good, and people often even credit President Trump with bringing in some policies that have helped that. But what are the headlines about President Trump? The White House has not had a consistent message focused on the economy. The message from the White House is defending themselves from all these negative stories that portray the White House chief of staff calling the president an idiot, or the president being disparaged by the defense secretary. It's hard, I think, to get over those stories, even when people feel like the economy is pretty good. When we ask people, are we in a recovery? We get record high numbers of people saying, yes, we're in a recovery. But is the country headed in the right direction? People do not feel the country's headed in the right direction. That's often driven by the economy. But with this White House, with this administration, it's now being driven by something else.
Those two things have become separated. Is there a way, I say Trump's approval rating down to 41, may go lower based on some of the numbers we've been seeing. We have seen his numbers bounce around a little bit in the past. I was looking back at it at the end of last year. He was down well into the 30s, his average approval rating. I said over the summer he got to 44%. Republicans tell you there's a difference there. 44% they think they can keep the House, 38% they think they've got no chance. We still got 2 months. Can he get it back up by Election Day?
He could get it back up, but also I could have a date with Jennifer Lawrence tonight. I think that we are seeing that the public has made up their minds on President Trump. They feel that there's too much drama in Washington. And we also see in the polls that Susan referenced a desire among the electorate, including many Republicans, or a small portion of them, to have Congress be a check on the president. And that is something we haven't seen in a long time, where a party, even within itself, is saying, a good number of them, we want checks and balances, and we want accountability in Washington. And I think we've also seen people go out and independently organize behind the scenes, and that's what happened in Virginia. That's how the House of Delegates almost flipped to the Democrats in 2017. And I think it's happening across the country.
Well, Joel, I have to ask you this, though. I mean, I can think back to so many flashbacks to the 2016 campaign where Trump's numbers appeared to be collapsing. The Access Hollywood tape is the most famous example. It is by no means the only example from 2016, and yet they did return to that baseline right before Election Day, just enough for him to get by as a Democrat. Are you apprehensive that history could repeat itself that way? I think it's different here because the president's not on the ballot this time, right? And I think that actually works against Republicans. Unfortunately, from the perspective of a Democrat, President Trump does have a very strong base following, but I think very similar to what Democrats were facing in 2016, where you had Barack Obama, who was very visible, but he's not on the ballot. So you're counting on him to turn people out and get people excited, but he's actually not the person people are voting for. Donald Trump's not the person who people are voting for. They're voting for either Joe Donnelly or Mike Braun in Indiana. They're voting for John Tester or the Republican, or they're voting for, Heidi Heitkamp or someone else in North Dakota. They're not voting for Donald Trump. And so they don't actually have that opportunity to go out and to say, we're going to cast an affirmative vote for Donald Trump. And I think you're going to see that reflected. Well, panel, stay put if you would, because I will be coming back. But first, I have to make another treacherous journey across the studio, because we talk about the very specific types of voters, types of changes in the electorate that Donald Trump brought about in 2016. One of them I want to show you because it sets up an interesting story for 2018. Let's see if I can get this right. So take a look back at this. This was, of course, you remember the electoral map, election night 2016, Donald Trump. He may have mentioned this once or twice since then. He got 306 electoral votes that night. But remember this state, this funny one with the sort of zebra stripes right there, the state of Maine, where you got blue and red. And remember, Maine is one of those two states, Nebraska is the other, where they split the electoral votes, at least potentially. You'll win a couple of electoral votes if you win the state, but then each congressional district within the state gets an electoral vote. And of course, in Maine in 2016, they did have a split. The 2nd congressional district, this is probably 3/4 of the land area of the state of Maine, western Maine, rural Maine. You got Augusta, you got Bangor. It's not a lot of the sort of southern coast of Maine that a lot of folks think of when you think of tourism and all of that. But this part of Maine, look at this swing. It was almost a 20-point swing. Obama had won this part by 9 points. Trump won it by 10. Trump got an electoral vote out of Maine because of it. Maine now, this district has a Republican congressman. He is running for re-election. He is in a tough race for re-election. This is going to be one of those districts we look at this fall. It's a real test this fall as Bruce Poliquin, the incumbent here, runs for re-election about that Trump surge vote from 2016. The places like the 2nd Congressional District of Maine that swung very hard from Obama to Trump by a 20-point swing. Where do they stand 2 years into the Trump presidency? And guess what? Our own Jacob Soboroff was up there in the 2nd Congressional District of Maine. Talk to those voters. Let's see what he found.
This is the northeastern edge of the United States, and this right here is Canada. You can actually see the border clear cut all the way through on the mountain right there. That's part of the longest stretch of unguarded border in the world. And this is the very beginning of Maine's 2nd Congressional District, which is what we came to check out. We wondered what people do for a living along this border without walls. So we headed to the town of Mars Hill. You guys produce millions of potatoes a year out of your operation here.
Millions and millions, yes.
Millions and millions. Nick McCrum's family business produces potatoes for chips like Lay's here in the county that produces more potatoes than any other in the U.S. Can I pull one out of the ground?
Yes.
Oh, come on. Oh, I'm bad at this. Is Idaho a dirty word around here?
A little bit, yeah.
What are the issues around here that people care about? Is this it?
That's part of it. It's a big part of it for us, obviously. Paychecks and their jobs.
Nick mentioned that paychecks and jobs have been drying up for another local industry. So we headed to the town of Millinocket, which was hit hard when Maine's paper mills started closing because of foreign competition. We drove here to this place, which is the Great Northern Paper Mill, or at least it used to be. And when we were checking it out, we were just looking down here, and this is Mike, who's out here fishing, I guess, right, Mike?
Yeah, doing a little smallmouth fishing.
How many people do you think lost their jobs when this place closed?
Oh, it's in the thousands.
In the thousands?
Yeah.
These guys let us in, and we got to see a 700-foot-long building that used to house giant paper rolling machines. These jobs are gone now. I mean, what matters to people here?
Jobs. People would love to come back here and live here, but they got to be able to support themselves.
To find where residents of the district are going for jobs, we went to Bangor, the biggest city, with boutique coffee shops and upscale restaurants. You have a Maine tattoo? This is Maine. This is the state of Maine. So what do you do here?
I'm a host.
What's going to get you out to vote?
Raising minimum wage.
Raising minimum wage. There was one other major industry we hadn't checked out, so we drove southeast, past another closed paper mill, to the lobstering capital of Maine, Stonington. On the public dock, workers were waiting for the lobster boats to bring in the day's catch. So you used to work on a paper mill?
I did. You spend your whole life keeping something going, then they pull it out from under you. Doesn't make you feel very good.
How long were you working in the paper mill?
40 years.
You normally vote or no?
No, not normally.
Why not?
I really don't think that our opinions matter.
Do you care about it?
Oh, of course. It affects my livelihood. Why wouldn't I? I'd be foolish not to care.
Do you guys think that people in Washington kind of understand what life's like out here?
Oh, no, you kidding me? Ow.
How you guys doing? You're on TV today. Can I come down there with you?
Sure.
This is my first time on a lobster boat. You guys are brother-sister team?
Yep.
How long you guys been doing this?
Our whole lives.
And it's just a family business?
That's right. Right.
Is there one party or candidate, like for Congress, for instance, that for you makes a difference or no? day to day out here, what do people care about? What are people concerned about?
I know they try and change the laws a lot. How many traps we fish, or like when we fish.
It's funny when you say talking about changing laws. I thought you were going to say the laws that people talk about changing in Washington, like gay marriage, medical marijuana, all that stuff. But you're talking about when you can haul traps.
Absolutely, yeah. That's when politics and that kind of affects us.
Politics and lobster fishing collide.
Yeah.
You guys know who Paul Manafort is?
I don't.
You don't. How about Robert Mueller?
Oh.
That makes sense. You guys got other things you're thinking about.
Yes. Yep.
And here with us now, back away from the lobster traps of coastal Maine, Jacob
At the big
Soboroff.
board. I'm very intimidated to be here with you.
You should not be intimidated. It works at least half the time.
Good, okay, good.
I love what you asked at the end of that piece, because obviously I work in cable news. I encourage people to spend lots of time watching cable news. But on the other hand, you've got some hardworking folks there, folks with real concerns about what the government should be doing in their view, what it shouldn't be doing. And you can see they're not things we talk about day and night at a place like this, place like CNN. It's not on their radar.
Yeah, ditto. And I feel the exact same way you do. We talk about the Russia investigation ad nauseum here, and for good reason. If the president colluded with Russia in order to influence the election, we should be talking about that. He should face the consequences for that. But it's just not top of mind for the people across this country that want to put their shoes on, get out of bed, maybe in the reverse order, go to work and figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And so that was the one big thing that I took away from this. The other big thing was over the course of the last couple of days, the president and President Obama have been battling it out about who should get the biggest pat on the back for the state of the economy today. When you talk to the people where we were, up here in Aroostook County, all the way down to Bangor, all the way down to the lobster fishing areas, none of them are really saying either of them deserve great credit. They're all saying we still are looking every day for a good job. We still are looking for a good opportunity. And so if the President Trump thinks that's a winning message, he ought to go talk to the people in the 2nd Congressional District.
And that's interesting because we were talking about that last segment. When you get all these economic indicators that on paper say this economy is so strong, you're finding folks who are saying, I'm not necessarily feeling that.
It's just the reality is there are still a lot of people out there who are struggling day in and day out, not just to make ends meet, but to feel like their families are comfortable, their families are secure, that politicians actually care about them in their day-to-day lives. I think that they wake up and they turn on the news and they see us talking about Manafort and Russia and all this stuff. They hear the president screaming and tweeting, and they're just like, they tune out. They're like, that has nothing to do with what I care about. I care about potatoes. I care about paper mills. I care about lobsters. I care about, in Bangor, $15 minimum wage because that young woman says she can't make ends meet. Maybe she's spending too much on her Maine back tattoo, but she, that's the kind of stuff that they think about.
I'm curious, too. Did you get a sense? I mean, we say this is a swing. This was like a 20-point swing, really. So Obama in 2012, this has been Democratic for a long time up there. Abrupt, giant swing to Trump in 2016. What's the overall temperature toward Trump in 2018?
Look, I don't think so much for these folks it's about love or hate, diametrically opposed sort of positions. I think this man, President Trump, spoke to them in the last election cycle. I think that they still agree with a lot of stuff that he has to say. But as we point out in the piece, this border up here, this is the longest unguarded border in the world up here between the United States and Canada. The message about immigration, the messages that Donald Trump is talking about on a regular basis, not necessarily something that translate to them.
New Brunswick or whatever, Nova Scotia, which is it on the other side.
So they want to hear, look, Jared Golden is a really interesting candidate. He's a Marine Corps veteran. He's a young guy. He's in the state legislature there. I mean, I think he's the Speaker of the House, if I'm not mistaken. He's the fresh blood. As always, with every single one of these districts, is going to be who's going to turn out. Is the young woman in Bangor who wants a $15 minimum wage going to get up and go vote for the first time in her life? And if she doesn't, then Bruce Poliquin is sitting pretty, with these guys up in Aroostook County.
And when you were in Bangor, did you see Stephen King's house?
No, I didn't get to go. Have you been?
It's a gothic exterior. It looks like it's Stephen King's house. It's a tourist attraction.
I have one more question for you. Did you know that this is the only Republican district? You probably know. I'm Steve Kornacki. What am I talking about? This is the only Republican district in all of New England right now at this point.
Right. It's the New England, and it's the one that swung 20 points, too.
Dumb question for Steve Kornacki.
Well, I have to say yes. I'm going to look dumb if I say no. But Jacob Soboroff, I love your pieces. I love the drone shots. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, my friend.
Really appreciate it.
All right.
All right, I'm going to head back over now to our panel. Rejoining us, we got Joel Payne, Evan Siegfried, and Susan Page. And I almost timed that perfectly. Now I'm back. I just thought, and I said this to Evan, I'm curious what you guys make of this too, just this idea that I do think there is There's a disconnect there between maybe things that we talk about in sort of the news business all the time and what's on the mind of voters out there.
Well, that's always true. People always care most about what's happening to them. But I got to say, we had a Suffolk University poll in Maine about a month ago, and we said, what is the most important issue affecting your vote? And the #1 issue that people from Maine said was Trump. It doesn't tell you whether they wanted to vote for Trump or against Trump, but it said that even though they're concerned about pocketbook issues, the president looms pretty large in our politics.
It'll be interesting to see, too. I mean, it is. You set this up before, Evan, but this district right here, it's one of the tests. Donald Trump got that surge turnout, got that surge energy in 2016. The reason he's president is he took places that for at least a generation had been voting Democratic, and he got them to vote for him. And what's the reaction in those places going to be in 2018?
Well, we've seen it in 2017. As I talked about, there are the married white suburban women who have went out, and they were the ones who gave us in the Republican Party the majority in the House and in the Senate from 2010 on. And they turned around in 2017 in the special elections and in Virginia and in New Jersey and in Westchester County here in New York, and they said, we're done. We're abandoning the Republican Party and we're sending a message. They wake up every morning, they get their kids ready for school and they feed them breakfast. Then they go to their jobs themselves or deal with household chores if they're a stay-at-home mom. And then they pick their kids up and they deal with chaos day in and day out. And to see it on Twitter, they don't like it. And they see that nobody is holding the president accountable. And they say, you know what, it's time to give the other side a try.
Joel, we mentioned too, this district, and it's not just Maine 2nd, it's sort of just a stand-in for a lot of districts like it throughout the Midwest in particular, but places that President Obama carried decisively in 2012, places that for, boy, I hope my microphone is still on. Something just fell off me here. Places that have been Democratic for so long that swung with Donald Trump. There seems to be this debate I notice on the left in the Democratic Party now about the future direction. Is it to try to win back those voters, or is it to say, you know what, they've kind of crossed a line there and they're gone, and it's now about expanding to different. How do you look at that?
Well, I look at it like this. I think Democrats actually have been very smart about finding candidates that fit in different places. So we talked about, obviously, ad nauseum, Connor Lamb. We've talked about Doug Jones. We've talked about people around the country where Democrats have been viable in places where maybe they shouldn't have been. This candidate here, Jared Golden, a veteran, somebody who is definitely not sitting there reading off of Democratic DNC talking points every day. He's somebody that's going to speak to his district. And I think Democrats have actually been really smart about finding these types of candidates that are going to translate at home at these districts in ways where maybe Democratic candidates in the past haven't. So to that point, I actually think Democrats have a 50-state strategy unlike they've had the last couple cycles.
Well, this is one of those districts we will be watching closely on election night, although I should point out the other interesting thing about Maine this year is they're doing this thing called instant runoff voting. So that race, if nobody gets to 50% there on election night, we may have to wait a week to find out who wins it. And in Maine, they do like to vote for independent candidates. Another new development this past week, we teased this a little earlier, though, it is the reemergence of the former president. His name's come up once or twice in this program, Barack Obama, and he broke something of a modern presidential tradition of not attacking a successor. Take a look.
Progress doesn't just move in a straight line. There's a reason why progress hasn't been easy, and why throughout our history, every 2 steps forward seems to sometimes produce 1 step back. Sometimes the backlash comes from people who are genuinely, if wrongly, fearful of change. More often it's manufactured by the powerful and the privileged who want to keep us divided and keep us angry and keep us cynical because that helps them maintain the status quo and keep their power and keep their privilege. And you happen to be coming of age during one of those moments. It did not start with Donald Trump. He is a symptom, not the cause.
And that was President Obama, former President Obama, back on the campaign trail. And it's interesting to see just 2 years, really a year and a half since he left office, to see him getting right back into politics like that. Went to California over the weekend, campaigned a lot of districts out there, Republican incumbents, Hillary Clinton districts, President Obama, former President Obama going in there, trying to boost the Democrats. It does raise a question. How common is this? How frequent is this to see a former president get involved like this so soon after leaving the White House? The short answer is it is not that common. Although that may not be because presidents didn't want to. It may be that they had no choice. Let me quickly take you through the sort of the modern history of this. Lyndon Johnson, he left office in January 1969. His popularity was dragged way down by the Vietnam War. 1970 midterm elections came around. There wasn't much demand from Democratic candidates for Lyndon Johnson to go barnstorming for them. Also, his health, it was also in decline a little bit in his final years. I don't think this one needs much explanation. Richard Nixon resigned around this time in 1974. He was exiled from American politics. There were no Republican candidates in the fall of 1974 asking him to campaign or for some time thereafter. There was Gerald Ford. He was the successor to Richard Nixon. He lasted until January 1977. He did, you can see him right here, he did campaign in 1978, but Gerald Ford was an unelected president. Remember, he got appointed vice president. The Senate voted him in. Then he took over for Nixon. He'd never run for national office, didn't win against Jimmy Carter in 76. So he was out there in 78. There was talk Ford might run for president again in 1980, but did he really have the stature you'd normally associate with a former president? Maybe not politically quite as much as we see with others who won elections before. Jimmy Carter, he lost a landslide in 1980, 44-state landslide to Ronald Reagan in 1980. Not much demand by Democrats for him in 1982. We mentioned Reagan. He did leave office very popular. He was a two-term president, but in 1990, first midterm after he left office, he was basically retired. He was pushing 80 years old. He had a memoir come out that fall. That was sort of his major event. This was not somebody who was interested in getting involved in day-to-day politics that much. Certainly the focus of folks around Reagan was much more on his legacy at that point. George H.W. Bush, he was defeated for re-election in 1992, got 38% of the vote. That was the lowest share for an incumbent president since 1912, so there wasn't a lot of demand for him in 94. Also in 94, there were two Bushes running for office. There was Jeb in Florida, George W. in Texas. There was, the Bush parents did get involved in those races a little bit, but he was not out barnstorming the country in 1994. Here's somebody who was in his first midterm. Bill Clinton, probably not a surprise. He did leave office, very popular in 2001, despite all the controversies of his second term. Very active on the 2002 midterm campaign trail. Although, remember, 2002 midterm campaign trail, George W. Bush, the president at that point, he was extremely popular. This was a year after 9/11. His approval rating was nearly 70%. So Clinton was out there, but Bush was also extremely popular at that point. We mentioned Bush. By the end of his second term as president, he was not very popular. His numbers fell well into the 30s, even the 20s in some polls. 2010 midterm, there were no Republican candidates clamoring for George W. Bush to hit the trail for them. And then that brings us, of course, to Barack Obama. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, really the only two we've seen do this, really go out there and make a full midterm push. And Obama, unlike Bill Clinton, he gets to do it where his successor is only at 41%. Remember, George W. Bush in 2002 was near 70. Obama right now does this with Donald Trump at 41%. So maybe would it be more effective to campaign if you're a former president in that kind of environment? Joining our discussion now, along with Joel and Evan, is Brianna Joy Gray, senior politics editor for The Intercept, and Benji Sarlin, political reporter at NBC. He joins us from Washington. Thanks, everybody. And Brianna, let me bring you in on that. Barack Obama back out there. I'll give you the sort of the cynical take on it that you'll hear is Barack Obama in 2010 in the midterms, in 2014 in the midterms, in 2016 in the general election, tried as hard as he could to boost his party, and without his name being on the ballot, was unable to do so. Would it be any different in 2018?
I think it has the potential to be different. I think that people still find him to be an incredibly popular president, and he has the ability to bring attention and give real credibility to ideas that have been maligned by a certain segment of the Democratic Party who's still living, unfortunately, in 2016. So I think one of the most remarkable things we saw from the speech he recently gave at college was that he referred to Medicare for All as a great new idea. And a lot of people on the left were a little stunned by that, considering that we've been kind of defending Medicare for All and been really encouraged by a lot of progressive candidates who've taken up that mantra. But there's still a cohort of both kind of traditional Democrats and voters who are resistant to the idea because of his associations with Bernie Sanders. So his ability to lend his stamp of approval to policies, progressive policies like that, is extraordinary, mostly because it has a unifying effect within the party.
I was trying to see, though, Evan, where the calculation is here for Democrats, for folks around Obama, in terms of where they think he's helping. I thought it was noteworthy that they chose to send him in that first weekend out to California, Southern California, and these are districts, a lot of them Orange County, traditionally Republican. voters who didn't like Trump that much. Trump lost a lot of these districts, but the Republican incumbents were still able to win. It seems like that sort of old original appeal of Obama, the guy who said there's no red states and blue states in 2004, they still think that can work in districts like that.
Well, first of all, he's very popular with the base, and I think with the majority of the country. I'm a Republican, and I like Barack Obama as a person. I think he's an incredibly decent and good man at his heart. I disagree with him on policy, but I think there are a lot of Americans who feel that way. And if you contrast that to what we see from the White House today, that is a stark reminder of this is what Democrats could be, and they're hoping that it could rub off on other Democratic candidates. And then you also have the fundraising ability of Barack Obama. He attaches his name to a Democratic candidate who might be having a little bit of money problems or needs that extra push over the hill, and Barack Obama can be that person who helps out. I am a little worried when he takes shots directly at President Trump. Yes, these are unusual times, but it sets a precedent. What will Trump do? Or what would somebody who's a successor 10, 20 years down the line? Will it now be the new norm to say, I don't like your policy? I think presidents should stay out of it. But Republicans, we are campaigning with a former president as well, George W. Bush. He's with Rick Scott right now doing a ton of fundraising.
That is the amazing thing, too, about this moment. We show where George W. Bush ended up and where he was in 2010, the sort of political resurrection of George W. Bush. Brianna, you mentioned, though, the content of Barack Obama's message this week when it came to, in particular, single-payer health care. Let's play a little bit of what he had to say about that.
So Democrats aren't just running on good old ideas like a higher minimum wage. They're running on good new ideas like Medicare for all, giving workers seats on corporate boards, reversing the most egregious corporate tax cuts to make sure college students graduate debt-free.
Now, let me bring Benji Sarlin in on that, because Benji, this is fascinating. This is a new moment in American politics where this debate over President Obama there calls it Medicare for all. He's talking about single-payer health care, which an idea that even when Barack Obama was president, that was considered on the fringes of the national political debate. Now you've got Barack Obama talking it up. You've got Democratic candidates running on it, and you wrote about it this week, how it's taking over in a lot of these races, Republicans trying to sound the alarm bell and run against it.
That's right, Steve. As Brianna mentioned, until now, this debate about Medicare for all and single payer and various other kind of competing proposals has mostly just been between Democrats. It's been between more centrist, more left-wing, more moderate Democrats, different factions debating how far they should go in health care. That's changing this month. All of a sudden, we're in the general election of the midterms, and Republicans are really just blanketing the airwaves in a whole bunch of races for House, for governor, with ads specifically targeting single payer. And they're using the same set of talking points mostly, going after the cost, saying it will raise taxes. A lot of the ads are about scaring seniors with the idea that maybe it will compete with traditional Medicare, or that additional spending will, say, bankrupt Medicare somehow. And this is an interesting test for people who've been supporting those policies, because they've never really faced a sustained critique from the right before. And there's going to be a lot of these, and a lot of well-financed ones, before a bill ever gets anywhere near a Democratic president's desk.
Yeah, and the potential, at least, political risk that Benji's describing there, I think we can put this up on the screen. Barack Obama, when he was president, was certainly mindful of that. We can, in 2009, one of the accusations as the Affordable Care Act was being crafted was that, hey, this is basically a stalking horse for single payer. Conservatives were saying, don't let them get this through, because the next step will be single payer. Do we have that? Can I put that up on the screen? What Barack Obama... I thought we had it this time. Oh, what a disappointment. Well, Joel, I won't spoil the surprise any longer. Barack Obama was against that in 2009 and said, don't worry, anybody, this is not the first step to single payer. But maybe it was now, Democrats are saying.
Yeah, and listen, this happens a lot with former presidents, right? They're a little rusty. Their fastball is maybe not what it was when they were active. I think this happened to Bill Clinton, frankly, during the 2008 campaign. A lot of people accused him of that. So I'm not surprised that Barack Obama is maybe a little slow out the gates. But as Evan and as Brianna said, he's incredibly popular, not just with Democrats, but really with independents, with young voters, with African Americans. He's going to activate that base. But I will say this, you brought up a great point about him being not on the ballot in 10, 14, and 16, and not being able to turn out voters. And that's a real challenge for Democrats. They have not figured out how to take the Obama legacy and turn that into turnout on Election Day. That's still a challenge that Democrats have not been able to figure out. How do you take the legacy of Obama and turn it into wins for others? Where's that coattail effect for Obama? I think Democrats still have to answer that challenge this November.
I'm wondering what you think the political risk of single payer would be, because it's interesting. We showed there's been this change in how Democrats perceive the politics of the ACA. Joe Manchin in 2010 would not run on this in West Virginia. In 2018, he seems to. But now Republicans think they have found sort of an in politically in saying, hey, Medicare for all is going way too far, going to cost too much money, too much of a change.
I think there's an extraordinary political risk in not running with single-payer health care. We've seen recent polls show that it's not only overwhelmingly popular with Democrats, it now has a small margin of popularity, a majority of popularity among Republicans. I think that health care is a central issue to a majority of Americans, and the worst thing that you can do is, in this environment, is run on the status quo. What Barack Obama was in 2008 was a transformative change agent figure. Again, in 2012, he ran on that record. And what we saw in the last election, in 2016, like it or not, is that voters came out for someone who seemed to represent change. That was Donald Trump, because the Democrats didn't sufficiently put forward a candidate who was able to articulate a vision that was a departure from what they already knew. And what people understand is their life as it is isn't sufficient.
We just put the poll up on the screen a second ago. I was looking around earlier. This was from the Kaiser Family Foundation, Washington Post a couple months ago. And I imagine this is one of those questions, Benji, when you start polling single payer. The wording is going to matter a lot here. If you're using the terminology, some Democrats want Medicare for all. If you were to add in, I imagine, a Canadian-style single-payer system, maybe that would change it a bit. It seems like the politics of this just are not hashed out. The polling there showed the way that question was asked. It was majority support, slightly 51-43. But I imagine we're still trying to figure out what the politics of this are.
Right, and this is something when I talk to Republicans and Democrats alike who work in politics, they seem to agree on this. Single payer is still very undefined in a lot of voters' minds. A lot of people haven't heard the arguments for it or against it much either way. And one example in the polling that Kaiser's done, which is the pollster you have on screen there, is that, you know, people aren't sure what Medicare for all means. There's not actually a universal agreed upon definition. It's often interpreted as single payer health care, which is what we've been talking about. But some people argue Medicare for all can mean just access to a public health plan of some kind, being able to buy into Medicare and maybe keep your private insurance if you don't like that. So there's some confusion. For example, that Kaiser poll there, they found in another one that about half of respondents, I think it was 47%, thought that if you pass single payer, they would be able to keep the plan they have right now, which is just by definition for most of them, pretty much everyone, not true. So there's still a lot of work to do on both sides to kind of explain what this all means. And that's why this fight is so important right now. It's one of the first times we're really seeing people go to battle over it.
Very interesting to watch the terrain of healthcare politics change so dramatically in really such a short period of time. Benji, Joel, Evan, Brianna, thank you all for being with us. That's the fastest 42 minutes in television. Is this television, streaming, Roku? I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but live presentation of news and commentary. It was a very fast 42 minutes. Thank you at home for watching. We're going to be right back here next week as the countdown continues to the midterms. Next Tuesday, we will see you right here. Thank you for being with us.